On May 1st, 1992, Gary Smithy was watching a program on Fox when they aired a segment that featured a picture of someone who looked identical to his colleague at work. To say he was shocked would have been an understatement. The resemblance was just so striking that he couldn't push it to the back of his mind, even though he tried. So he tells another of his colleagues, and after some thoughts and deliberation, they decided to call the police and have them look into the matter themselves. Perhaps it was just an uncanny resemblance. The person on the TV was called Kenneth McDuff, and his colleague is Richard Fowler. So there was really no way that they were the same person. The police, on their end, had been on the lookout for Kenneth McDuff for more than 8 weeks at a time, and all their searches had been proven futile. So, as a last resort, they decided to air a picture of McDuff on the segment of America's Most Wanted on Fox. Following that, they were getting a barrage of calls and reports, and none of them were really yielding any desirable results. Some were prank calls, some were social justice warriors, some were people who just wanted to shit on their neighbors. Others were just people who were calling because maybe they saw someone with a bit of resemblance, no matter how far-fetched it was. And so, getting that tip that day, they weren't really too impressed or excited. The man in question, McDuff, was wanted for crimes committed in Texas. So, getting this call from Kansas, they weren't too excited about it. But, with no stones to be left unturned, they ran a check on this Richard Fowler guy, and they quickly found that he had been arrested before for some minor crimes like soliciting sex workers. So they ran his fingerprints on the database, and lo and behold, it was a match with that of Kenneth McDuff. On the 4th of May of 1992, 3 days after the call, Richard Fowler, better known by his real name, Kenneth McDuff, aka the Broomstick Killer, was arrested. His crimes are one that would shock the whole world and change the criminal justice system forever. But to get a bit of an understanding of just what we're dealing with here, let's rewind back 26 years to the summer of 1966. Young Kenneth McDuff was only 20 years old at the time. It was 10 p.m. on August the 6th, and McDuff and a new friend of his, an 18-year-old man named Roy Dale Green, were cruising around a small town called Everman, south of Rosebud, where McDuff lived. And they were cruising in McDuff's new Dodge Coronet that his mom had gotten him 8 months back when he was released from prison. They'd been at work all day pouring concrete for McDuff's father, and that night, after a couple of drinks at a bar and visiting some friends, they just wanted the girl to spend the night with. Roy, who had only known McDuff for about a month at a time, was fascinated with McDuff. All the stories that McDuff had been telling him, even though they were downright depraved and disgusting, they kind of ignited in him a godlike awe at McDuff. He looked up to him, and he had this urge to someone impress him, kind of like showing him that he was also a tough guy. He didn't exactly believe that any of the stories were true. I mean, what kind of person would have raped and murdered multiple women at age 20, or think that killing a woman was like killing a rabbit? That level of monstrosity was only seen in fiction. It was preposterous. So to him, they were just jokes and fables. And so as they drove that night, they spotted the girl with 2 guys just standing beside the 1957 Ford sedan at a baseball field. McDuff parks his car about 150 yards from them, reaches into his glove compartment, and gets out his gun. Roy at this point was still a bit under the impression that it was all just fun of games. I mean, he couldn't really hurt these kids, right? Right? Right. And together, they step out of the car and walk towards the trio. Pointing his gun at them, McDuff collects their wallets and orders them to get into the trunk of their car. Now you can imagine how scared they must have been. It was very late at night and they were in a really secluded area. Plus, McDuff was a pretty intimidating guy. He was 6'4" and he had a friend with him. Not to talk about the guard. I mean, anyone would be pissing their pants. So the teenagers were scared and they fearfully got into the trunk of the car. McDuff gets their key and he drives their car while he instructs Roy to follow from behind in his car. The impression that it was all fun and games was likely starting to fade a bit, but for whatever reason, Roy Green chose to stick with him. and they both drive to a very secluded part of town. And after getting the girl out of the trunk of their car into the trunk of his car, he proceeds to mercilessly fire 6 bullets into the doors as they knelt down, still inside the trunk of their car, begging for their lives, as Roy walked in dread and disbelief. After killing them, McDuff orders Roy, who at this time was scared for his own life, to clean their fingerprints off the car. And when Roy was done with that, he tried to close the trunk of the car, but unable to do that with the body of the boys inside, he just backs the car against the fence and leaves it there. After that, they drive off in his car to another secluded area where the 2 of them would proceed to take turns raping and torturing the young 16-year-old girl until they were satisfied. When they were done, he again drove them to another secluded part of town on a gravel road, and there he made the girl lie on her back on the crossroad, and he gets a 3-foot broomstick from his car, straddled her, and he ordered Roy to hold her legs so she doesn't move. He then puts the stick across her neck, and then he just starts to push it down as hard as he could towards the ground, ignoring her pleas and her screams and breaking her neck in the process. Roy would later claim that he did all this under duress as he was also scared for his life. After killing her, they threw her body over a fence into some nearby bushes and they drove off, stopping along the way to bury their bloody underwear and the boys' wallets, and later stopping at a convenience store for some drinks before he headed off to spend the night at Roy's house. Those 3 teens would turn out to be 16-year-old Edna Lou Sullivan, a 17-year-old boyfriend Robert Brand, and his 15-year-old cousin, McDonough, who was visiting from California. The body of the boys would be discovered the next day, and the girls 3 days later. The next day, while driving with some of his friends, Roy hears about the killings on the radio, and he just gets so grief-stricken that he just starts to confess. He will later, with the advice of his mom, turn himself over to the police and become the star witness in the trial against McDuff in exchange for a lesser sentence. Kenneth McDuff was born on the 21st of March 1946 in a small town in central Texas called Rosebud. He grew up with his parents and 5 siblings, and he was the 5th of 6 children. Now, from an early age, he was treated like a god, and he was spoiled rotten by his mom and his 3 older sisters. And even though he had a younger sister and an older twin brother, for whatever reason, he was treated like the baby of the home. Now, while growing up, his older twin brother, Lonnie, was the primary child of the house, always getting in fights and committing petty crimes, while McDuff was known everywhere as a bully. Everyone in town was terrified of his family. They weren't exactly bad people. Their father, John Allen, ran a successful media construction company, and he was a pretty soft-spoken man who left family matters to his wife, their mother, Addie McDuff. Now, Addie, on the other hand, ran a laundromat just across the street from their house, and she was the real menace. She was feared by everyone in their town. Pistol-packing Mama McDuff, as she was often called, was known to always carry a pistol, and she would flare up if anyone so much as looked at her children the wrong way, and she would flare up times too if it was Kenneth. Being pretty financially well off, she was able to buy Kenneth McDuff whatever he wanted. She got him a very loud motorcycle when he was younger, and a Dodge Charger just after he got out of prison for burglary. In his late teens, Kenneth McDuff had been notorious for burglary in the towns around his home, and though at the time he had never been convicted for murder, he openly bragged about raping and killing at least 2 girls in the past. One time, when he was 17 years old, he confided in his brother that he had sexually assaulted a woman, and later slit her throat, and later he left her body in a ditch, and his brother had just nonchalantly told him to go to bed and sleep it off. Now, in 1966, at the age of 20, Kenneth was charged with the murder of the 3 teenagers, and based on the testimonies of Broadway Green and the mountain of evidence stacked against him, Kenneth was sentenced to death by the electric chair. During an interview, his mother had told reporters that Kenneth had been with a girl from their church at the time the 3 teenagers were murdered, and that he was willing to risk death in the electric chair just to spare the girl's reputation. "He's too good for his own good," she said. "If only she knew." Rhoda Green was sentenced to 25 years in jail. He was released in 1979 after serving 13 years and returned back to his town, Maryland, where he lived with his family. According to some sources, the mother of the teens mentally scarred him for life. In 1972, so about 6 years after his sentence, a Supreme Court ruling overturned all the death sentences in the United States at the time, and all deaths for inmates were moved to the general population, and their sentence commuted to a life sentence. Kenneth McDuff was one of the 88 lucky that were freed from death in Texas as a result of that ruling, and in 1976, so 10 years after his sentence, he was eligible for parole. But no one ever thought that he'd be granted parole. But he just kept applying and failing and trying again as often as he could, even going as far as to bribe one of the board members with $10,000, which would be approximately $38,000 in today's money. But that didn't work, and he was convicted of bribery. But even with that, even with his horrible case file, in 1989, after about 22 years in prison, to the horror of law enforcement and everyone in Rosebud and the whole state of Texas as a whole, Kenneth McDuff was granted parole. Now, Kenneth had always been a lucky one. His first burglary conviction was one that was assessed penalties totaling 52 years, but because he was only 18 at the time, he only served 10 months. And after his murder conviction in 1966, he came within days of his execution 3 times. Twice in 1969 and again in April of 1970, but he was granted court stays every time. His mother had hired a very reputable lawyer who really impressed everyone while representing McDuff. She had spent a ton of money trying to make sure that her son was free. And then there was also the overturning of the death sentence, Foreman versus Georgia. It was even said that while in prison, he lived like a boss and he had a lot of clout. Being convicted with bribing a member of the board would have given McDuff another life sentence and pushed his eligibility of parole to 1992. But because of an error, he was only sentenced to 2 years for that, which was meaningless since he had already accumulated more than 2 years of good time while waiting for his trial. Now, also, the fact that even though no one in 1,000 years could have imagined that Kenneth would ever be granted parole, in October of 1989, he was. And McDuff was back in the streets. The once nice and bubbly town of Rosebud became quiet and dull. Like everyone was scared. Guns were getting sold out fast and people were barring their doors as hard as they could. The streets were unsafe. Everyone knew, and everyone was terrified of McDuff. Barely 3 days after his release, the body of 29-year-old Sarah Parker was found, dumped in the field. She had been raped, beaten, and strangled. Now, a lot of people wonder why someone as violent as McDuff was ever released from prison on parole, and it boils down to this. In 1987, prisons in Texas were getting severely overcrowded, and it had become a major concern for everyone. Even the federal government had threatened to fine the state $24 million per month, which is approximately $665 million today, if they failed to reduce the population. So, to reduce the overcrowding, the governor of Texas, along with the board members and the prison system, decided that 150 non-violent prisoners must be released on parole every day. Now, at the time, there were only 15 board members going through the case files. It was later increased to 18 board members in 1989, but still, the workload was crushing. I'm talking about 1,000 case files every week for each person. So there was really no way that they could meticulously go through each person's file. Now, at first, they were only sorting through non-violent criminals, pickpocket, drug users, scammers, and the likes, but they quickly ran out of those, and then it was the armed robbers, the burglars, but again, they ran out of those fast. And they had no other option than to just keep going down the barrel to the more violent criminals, the non-conformists, the rapists, the murderers, just so they could be able to meet up with the numbers, the quota. And soon, they got to the likes of McDuffs, the real heart of criminals. And at this point, the board members sorting out these names didn't really know anything about McDuff. To them, he was just a number. And so, they lumped him up with other similar criminals and they granted him parole. In 1989 alone, the same year that McDuff was granted parole, more than 60% of the entire prison population were granted parole. 9 months after his release, McDuff was back in prison again, this time for making terrorist threats at a group of black teenagers and threatening to kill one of them with a knife. Being that he was on parole, the charges were enough to send him to prison for the rest of his life. But somehow, even after making this hatred for black people known at his hearing, with such vitriol that his lawyer had to yell at him to be quiet. With the help of that same lawyer, he only spent 5 months in prison for that, and he was released in December of 1990. I mean, he was so terrifying that nobody could even testify against him. Now, while in prison, McDuff had been taking college credit courses, probably to impress the board members so that they would grant him parole, which worked. And in early 1991, he enrolled into Texas State Technical College in Waco and moved into a dormitory campus. He also got a job as a cashier at a convenience store called Quick Pack, making $4 an hour, which would be approximately $9 in today's money. He quit that job after a month, and just a week before his final exams, he also dropped out of school, and he was back to his old ways, drinking, gambling, peddling and using drugs, soliciting sex workers, and hanging around the worst parts of town. Also, he was never in one place for long. He was just always moving around, doing and peddling drugs. On the evening of October 10th of 1991, McDuff was stopped by the police at a roadblock. Now, on closer inspection, they find that there was a woman who was tied up in his car and she was screaming and kicking at the windshield, trying to break out. But before they could rescue her, McDuff crashed through the roadblock, and even though the police tried to chase him, he managed to evade them. That night was the last time that woman was ever seen. She was 36-year-old Brenda Benson. At the time, she was a sex worker. Just 5 days later, on the evening of October the 15th, another woman was seen with McDuff. It was 21-year-old Virginity Moore. She was also a sex worker at Waco, and that day was also the last time she too was seen alive. On the evening of Sunday, 29th of December 1991, McDuff, along with an acquaintance of his, a man named Alva Worley, in the presence of onlookers, would kidnap a 28-year-old woman named Carla Reed from a car wash where she was getting her car washed. She would later be raped and tortured by both men, and that day was also the last time she was ever seen alive. At around midnight of March 1st, 1992, while out for drugs and God knows what, his car breaks down about a block from the convenience store where he had worked before. Now, that night, Melissa Ann Northrop, 22-year-old pregnant mother of two, was working the night shift. McDuff would later go there, rob her, and kidnap her. A few days later, while everyone was searching for her, his car was seen at the place where he had left it, about a block from the store, and he was also reported missing by his mother. Now, based on his violent past and because he had earlier told some friends about robbing Melissa at the Quick Pack, he became the prime suspect and a massive manhunt to find him. So, a few weeks after he kidnapped Melissa Northrop, on March 25th of 1992, police found the naked and badly decomposed body of 22-year-old Valencia K. Joshua, a sex worker from Waco. She had been buried in a shallow grave in a wooded area behind Texas State Technical College where McDuff had earlier studied. She was last seen looking for McDuff. Now, investigators were a bit shocked that she was a woman of African-American descent, and McDuff was known as a blatant racist. So this was a bit different from what they'd been accustomed to. On April the 26th of 1992, so about 57 days after she had been kidnapped by McDuff, sadly, the body of Melissa Ann Northrop was discovered floating in a shallow river in rural Dallas County. Her family, who had been hoping and praying that she'd be alright, they were heartbroken. At this time, it had been more than 7 weeks since the hunt for McDuff, and there were still no breakthroughs. So the police employed a different tactic to find him. They approached the producers of the Fox TV show America's Most Wanted, and they aired a segment about McDuff. On May 4th of 1992, Kenneth McDuff was arrested and extradited back to Texas to pay for his crimes. In 1993, he was found guilty of capital murder and sentenced to death by lethal injection. A year later, He received another death sentence for the murder of Melissa Adolfo and the abduction and assumed murder of Colin Reed. Now, all this while, he claimed that he was innocent for all the crimes, including the crimes he committed in 1966. Until September of 1998, when he would finally, after a lot of attempts, reveal the locations of the remains of Reginald Dean Moore and Brendan Thompson, 7 years after he had killed them. He refused to give up the location of Colin Reed because he felt that if he did that, he would lose all his prison privileges. But after a lot of promises and reassurance from the prison officials that he wouldn't, he finally tells them where to find what remains. And on the 6th of October of 1998, after he himself had been secretly brought to the site to help recover the remains as the police and all the investigators couldn't find it themselves, they finally found the remains of Colin Reed. She had been beaten and raped and tortured and then strangled to death. Just after 6 p.m. on the 17th of November of 1998, so 6 years after he was apprehended, 52-year-old Kenneth McDuff was executed by lethal injection. He showed no signs of remorse, and his last words were, "I'm ready to be released. Release me." He had spent more than 55% of his life incarcerated. His family refused to claim his body, and he is buried at the prison cemetery, Huntsville. His grave marked only by his death row number. According to some sources, he fathered the daughter when he raped the girl in 1964, but I couldn't really verify that. The case of Kenneth McDuff prompted the government of Texas to build more prisons, about $2 billion worth, and also create stricter laws against murderers and hardened criminals. A collection of laws that were later known as the McDuff Law. So, that'll do it for now. Please leave your thoughts in the comment section. Till next time, stay sharp and stay safe out there. Take care.